I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. 23 years as a real estate attorney, I'd seen neighbors turn on each other over fence lines and property disputes. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the day I discovered that Karen Mitchell, president of our Lakewood Estates HOA, had listed my 47-acre ranch for sale online without my knowledge, without my permission, and certainly without any legal right to do so. What started as a simple property violation notice would spiral into a legal nightmare that would cost her everything she owned, expose a decade-long conspiracy, and ultimately teach her that when you mess with someone's home, you better be prepared for war. This is the true story of how one HOA president's greed led to her complete destruction and the shocking twist that nobody saw coming. My name is David Chen, and for the past 15 years, I've called the most beautiful piece of property in Colorado home, nestled against Crystal Lake, my 47-acre ranch, and just where I live, it's my sanctuary. The main house sits on a bluff overlooking pristine water, with stables, a guest cottage, and enough privacy that my nearest neighbor is half a mile away, or so I thought. When I bought this property in 2009, it came with something I didn't fully understand at the time, an easement agreement. See, back in 1987, the original owner had granted the Lakewood Estates development a fancy subdivision of million-dollar homes access rights across a small portion of my land to reach the lake. It seemed harmless enough, a narrow gravel road that cut through the corner of my property, used maybe a dozen times a year by residents wanting to access the private boat launch. But I should have known that any agreement involving homeowners associations would eventually become a problem. Enter Karen Mitchell, 54 years old, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, and the kind of smile that never quite reaches the eyes. She moved into Lakewood Estates 3 years ago and immediately positioned herself as the savior the community never knew they needed. Within 6 months, she was HOA president. Within a year, she implemented 17 new community enhancement rules and doubled the annual fees. The first sign of trouble came at Tuesday morning in March. I was feeding the horses when I noticed surveyor flags along my property line, bright orange markers that definitely weren't there the day before. When I called the number on the surveying company's truck, they told me they'd been hired by the Lakewood Estates HOA to reassess easement boundaries and potential expansion opportunities. I immediately called Karen. "Oh, David, so wonderful to hear from you," she chirped into the phone. "Yes, we're just doing some routine maintenance assessments. Nothing to worry about at all." "Maintenance assessments for what?" "Exactly. Well, the community has been growing, and we want to ensure our lake access remains adequate for our needs." Something in her tone set off every alarm bell I developed in over 2 decades of legal practice. "Karen, the easement is clearly defined in the original 1987 agreement. There's no room for interpretation or expansion. Of course, we're just being thorough. I'll send you copies of everything once we're finished." She never sent those copies. 2 weeks later, I was reviewing property listings online for a client when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, on Zillow, Realtor.com, and 6 other major real estate platforms, was my ranch, listed for $4.2 million by Lakewood Estates Community Properties, with Karen Mitchell as the primary contact. The listing photos were clearly taken from someone standing on my property, aerial shots of my house, close-ups of the stables, even interior photos that must have been taken when I was traveling for business. The description read, "Exclusive 47-acre lakefront estate now available through Community Development Partnership, prime development opportunity with existing structures and unlimited potential." Development opportunity. They weren't just selling my home, they were advertising it as land to be subdivided and developed. I screenshot everything before calling my office. "Sir, cancel my appointments for the rest of the week. I need you to pull every document related to the Lakewood Estates easement agreement, and I need them today." My hands were shaking as I dialed Karen's number. This time, it went straight to voicemail. Karen, this is David Chen. I just found my property listed for sale on multiple websites with you as the contact. I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but you have exactly 24 hours to remove those listings and explain yourself before I file criminal charges for fraud, theft, and whatever else my very expensive legal team can dream up. Call me back now. She didn't call back. That evening, I drove the perimeter of my property, checking every fence line, every boundary marker. Everything looked normal until I reached the southeastern corner where the easement road entered. My land, there, barely visible in the fading light. I saw something that made my chest tighten. Fresh concrete footings, 4 of them, positioned exactly where someone would place them if they were planning to install a gate. I called my security company that night and had cameras installed along every entrance to my property. If Karen Mitchell thought she could steal my home, she was about to learn that I didn't become one of Colorado's top real estate attorneys by backing down from a fight. The next morning, I was reviewing the recorded easement documents when my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a Denver County Sheriff's deputy standing on my porch, holding an envelope. David Chen, you're being served with a notice of adverse possession claim and community development partnership violation. You have 30 days to respond. As I read through the legal documents, my worst fears were confirmed. Karen Mitchell and the Lakewood Estates HOA weren't just trying to sell my property, they were claiming they owned it. The adverse possession claim was audacious, even by HOA standards. According to the filing, the Lakewood Estates community had been openly, notoriously, and continuously using my property for over 15 years, which under Colorado law could potentially give them ownership rights. They claimed the easement road, the lake access, and even the boat launch area on my property constituted sufficient hostile use to establish a legal claim. It was complete nonsense, but it was also brilliant. Even if they ultimately lost the case, the legal cloud on my title would make the property impossible to sell or refinance. They could drag this out for years, bleeding me dry with legal fees while they continued to use my land as their personal playground. But Karen Mitchell had made one crucial mistake. She'd picked a fight with someone who understood the law better than she did. I spent the next 3 days in my office, surrounded by deed records, survey maps, and easement documents dating back to the 1920s. My assistant Sarah brought me coffee and takeout while I built our defense strategy. By Friday, I had a plan. Sarah, I need you to hire a private investigator. I want to know everything about Karen Mitchell, where she worked before moving to Colorado, her financial situation, any previous legal troubles, everything, already on it, she replied, sliding a manila folder across my desk. Mike Patterson started digging the day you got served. You're going to want to read this. The PI's preliminary report was fascinating. Karen Mitchell had moved to Colorado from Phoenix, where she'd been involved in 3 separate property disputes with previous neighbors. In 2 of those cases, she'd filed adverse possession claims that were ultimately dismissed. In the 3rd, she actually succeeded in claiming a strip of land from an elderly neighbor who couldn't afford to fight back. This wasn't her first rodeo. This was her business model. There's more. Sarah continued. Mike found something interesting about the Lakewood Estates financials. The HOA is underwater. They've been borrowing against future assessments to pay for Karen's improvements, and several homeowners are behind on their fees. The picture was becoming clearer. Karen needed money, and my property represented a multi-million-dollar solution to her community's financial problems. But I was just getting started. That weekend, I installed additional security cameras focused specifically on the easement road. I wanted to document exactly how the HOA was using my property. What I discovered over the next 2 weeks was even worse than I'd imagined. The dozen times a year lake access had become a daily parade of vehicles. Karen had apparently told the entire community that they now had unlimited access to my property. People were using my land for jogging paths, dog walking, and even hosting small parties near the boat launch. One evening, I counted 14 cars parked along my private road during what appeared to be an impromptu community barbecue. But the smoking gun came on a Tuesday afternoon when my cameras captured Karen Mitchell herself, giving what appeared to be a guided tour to a group of people in business suits. I could see her pointing toward my house and gesturing broadly across the property. She was selling my land to potential investors while I was still living in it. I called Mike Patterson immediately. I need audio surveillance, whatever it takes. I need to know what they're saying during these tours. David, I have to advise you that recording conversations without consent, the conversations are happening on my property without my consent. Look up Colorado's one-party consent laws and get me the audio equipment. 3 days later, I had my proof. As you can see, Karen's voice came through crystal clear on the recording. This is prime development land. The current owner is difficult, but we're resolving that through legal channels. Once the community partnership takes effect, we're looking at potential for 12 luxury homes, maybe more if we can get the zoning changed. One of the investors asked about the timeline, 6 months, maybe 8 at the outside. He can fight it all he wants, but adverse possession law is very clear in Colorado. We've been using this land for community purposes for over 15 years. His only option is to accept our buyout offer or lose everything through the court process. What kind of buyout are we talking about? Karen's laugh was like ice. We're prepared to offer him market value for just the house and maybe an acre. The rest of the land becomes community property. He'll take it, trust me. Once he sees our legal bills start piling up, he'll be eager to settle. I had enough evidence to bury her. But there was still something nagging at me. The confidence in her voice, the detailed knowledge of Colorado property law, the sophisticated legal strategy. This felt bigger than one HOA president with delusions of grandeur. That night, I called an old law school friend who worked for the Colorado Bar Association. Hey, Marcus, I need a favor. I need you to run a background check on someone claiming to practice real estate law. Karen Mitchell, currently living in Lakewood Estates. Marcus called me back an hour later. David, there's no attorney named Karen Mitchell registered with the Colorado Bar. There's no paralegal certification either. But here's the interesting part. There's a Karen Mitchell who had her real estate license suspended in Arizona 2 years ago for fraudulent property transactions. Suddenly, everything made sense. Karen Mitchell wasn't just trying to steal my property. She was running a full-scale real estate fraud operation, and my ranch was going to be her biggest score. Yet, the gloves were coming off. The Jefferson County Courthouse was bustling that Monday morning in October. I arrived early, carrying two bankers' boxes full of evidence and a legal strategy that would either vindicate me completely or destroy my career. Karen Mitchell sat at the plaintiff's table with a lawyer I didn't recognize, a sharp-dressed man in his 60s who carried himself like he'd never lost a case. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Westbrook. Judge Westbrook was known throughout Colorado as a no-nonsense jurist with zero tolerance for frivolous lawsuits. If anyone would see through Karen's scheme, it would be her. This is the matter of Mitchell versus Chen. Case number 2024 CV1847. Counsel, your opening statements. Karen's attorney, who introduced himself as Robert Hayes from Hayes and Associates, painted a picture of a greedy landowner trying to renege on decades of community cooperation. Your Honor, the residents of Lakewood Estates have relied on the defendant's property for essential lake access. For over 15 years, they've maintained the road, paid for improvements, and treated this land as their own because, legally speaking, it has become their own through adverse possession. Mr. Chen's sudden attempt to restrict access is not only legally unfounded but represents a breach of good faith that has harmed an entire community. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. Your Honor, this case is about fraud. Plain and simple. The plaintiff has systematically misrepresented the law, exceeded the scope of the original easement agreement, and engaged in criminal behavior by listing property she doesn't own for sale on multiple platforms. We will prove that Ms. Mitchell has no legitimate claim to my property and is, in fact, running a criminal enterprise designed to defraud homeowners and steal private property. Judge Westbrook raised an eyebrow. Those are serious accusations. Mr. Chen, I trust you have evidence to support them. Extensive evidence, Your Honor. The first day of testimony focused on the technical aspects of adverse possession law. Hayes called several Lakewood Estates residents who testified about their use of my property over the years. Their stories were consistent, maybe too consistent. Each witness used nearly identical language to describe how they'd openly and notoriously used the land, as if they'd been coached on the specific legal terminology. But it was during cross-examination that I started to expose the cracks in their story. Mr. Davidson, you testified that you've been using the defendant's property for lake access for 15 years. Is that correct? Yes, that's right. But according to the property records, you only purchased your home in Lakewood Estates 3 years ago. How do you explain this discrepancy? Davidson's face went red. Well, I meant that the community has been using it for 15 years. I personally have been using it since I moved here. I see. And who told you that you had the right to use Mr. Chen's property? Karen Mitchell. She's the HOA president. She knows all about our legal rights. This was exactly the opening I needed. By the end of the day, I'd established that every single witness had been told by Karen that they had unlimited access rights, despite the easement agreement clearly limiting use to occasional lake access for recreational purposes. Day 2 was when things got interesting. I called Mike Patterson, my private investigator, as my first witness, over Karen's attorney's strenuous objections. I played the audio recordings of Karen conducting tours on my property. As you can clearly hear, Your Honor, the plaintiff was actively marketing my property for development while this lawsuit was pending. She was promising potential investors that she would gain ownership through legal proceedings. Judge Westbrook stopped the recording. Ms. Mitchell, did you give tours of the defendant's property to potential investors? Karen conferred frantically with her attorney before answering. Your Honor, I was simply explaining to interested parties how community partnerships work. There was nothing improper about. Did you or did you not list the defendant's property for sale on real estate websites? The community was exploring development options that would benefit everyone. That's a yes or no. Question, Ms. Mitchell. Karen's composure finally cracked. Yes, but we had every right to do so under the partnership agreement. What partnership agreement? I stood up immediately, Your Honor. There is no partnership agreement. The plaintiff has never produced any document creating a partnership between Mr. Chen and the whore. He's jumped to his feet. Your Honor, we object to this line of questioning. The partnership agreement is still being finalized. Judge Westbrook's expression could have frozen water. Mr. Hayes, are you telling this court that you filed an adverse possession claim based on a partnership agreement that doesn't exist? Your Honor, we approached the bench. Both of you. Now, the sidebar conference lasted 10 minutes. When we returned, Judge Westbrook looked like she wanted to hold someone in contempt. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short recess. Mr. Hayes, I strongly suggest you use this time to consult with your client about the potential consequences of filing fraudulent documents with this court. During the break, I watched Karen pace frantically in the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear. Whatever conversation she was having, it wasn't going well. When we reconvened, Hayes asked for permission to withdraw from the case, Your Honor, due to irreconcilable differences with my client regarding case strategy. I must respectfully request to withdraw as counsel. Judge Westbrook denied the request. Mr. Hayes, you filed this lawsuit. You're going to see it through. Mr. Chen, call your next witness. Your Honor, I call Karen Mitchell to the stand. The next to ours were the most satisfying of my legal career. Under oath, Karen was forced to admit that she had no legal training, no real estate license in Colorado, and no written agreement giving her the right to list my property for sale. She claimed everything was a misunderstanding and that she was just trying to facilitate community dialogue about development opportunities. But I wasn't finished. Ms. Mitchell, are you familiar with the property dispute you were involved in Phoenix, Arizona, in 2019? Hayes objected. But Judge Westbrook overruled him. That was a completely different situation. Different how? Didn't you file an adverse possession claim against an elderly neighbor in that case as well? The circumstances were entirely different, were they? Didn't you ultimately acquire a portion of that neighbor's property through legal proceedings after they couldn't afford to continue fighting? Karen's face went pale. I don't have to answer that. Actually, you do. You're under oath. Judge Westbrook leaned forward. Answer the question. Ms. Mitchell, yes. But that was completely legitimate. How many times have you filed adverse possession claims, Ms. Mitchell? The courtroom was dead silent. Karen looked at her attorney, then back at me, then at the judge. Your Honor, I need to consult with my attorney. Answer the question. For times, the gasp from the gallery was audible. Even Judge Westbrook seemed surprised. And how many of those claims were successful? Karen's voice was barely a whisper. 3, I had her. But I wasn't done yet, because tomorrow, I was going to reveal the evidence that would not only destroy Karen's case, but send her to prison. The real surprise witness was going to change everything. Day 3 began with a bombshell I hadn't seen coming. As I was setting up my files, Hayes approached the defense table with a manila envelope. Mr. Chen, my client would like to discuss a settlement. Not interested. You haven't heard the terms yet. I don't care about the terms. Your client committed fraud, and I intend to prove it. But Hayes was persistent. She's prepared to drop all claims against your property, remove the listings, and pay you $50. 0 for your legal expenses, $50,000. It was more than my actual legal costs, and it would make this whole nightmare disappear. For a moment, I was tempted. But then I remembered the audio recording of Karen laughing about how I'd take it once the legal bills started piling up. Tell your client she can keep her money. I'm finishing this. Judge Westbrook called the court to order, and I stood to call my surprise witness. Your Honor, I called Detective Maria Santos from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. Karen's head snapped up. This was clearly not part of her expected defense strategy. Detective Santos was a 20-year veteran who specialized in real estate fraud. What she had discovered during her investigation would change everything. Detective Santos, did you have occasion to investigate the defendant's claims regarding Ms. Mitchell's background? Yes. We did. Mr. Chen provided us with evidence suggesting a pattern of fraudulent property transactions across multiple states. Hayes objected. But Judge Westbrook was clearly interested in what the detective had found. What did your investigation reveal? We discovered that Karen Mitchell is not her real name. The defendant is actually Catherine Brennan, who has been using false identities to run real estate scams in 4 different states over the past 8 years. The courtroom erupted. Karen or Catherine jumped to her feet. That's a lie. You can't prove any of that. Judge Westbrook banged her gavel. Sit down, Ms. Mitchell. Detective Santos, continue. We found evidence that the defendant has used at least 3 different identities to purchase properties in HOA communities, get herself elected to leadership positions, and then file adverse possession claims against neighboring properties. The pattern is always the same. She targets isolated, high-value properties owned by individuals who might be vulnerable to prolonged legal battles. I felt a chill run down my spine. Detective, are you saying that Ms. Mitchell specifically targeted my property? Based on our investigation, yes. Public records show she purchased her home in Lakewood Estates specifically because of its proximity to your ranch. She researched the original easement agreement, the property values, and your background before making the purchase. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't opportunistic fraud, it was a carefully planned operation. Detective Santos, what else did your investigation reveal? We found evidence that the defendant has been running a sophisticated operation involving fake legal documents, forged survey reports, and coordination with corrupt attorneys in multiple jurisdictions. The Hayes and Associates law firm that represented her in this case doesn't actually exist. The real Robert Hayes died in 2018. I turned to look at the man who had been representing Karen throughout the trial. He was already reaching for his briefcase, clearly preparing to bolt. "Bailiff, please detain that man," Judge Westbrook ordered. "Detective Santos, how many victims are we talking about?" "At least 17 property owners across Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. We estimate the total value of fraudulently acquired property at over $23 million. The courtroom was in chaos. Karen Catherine was screaming about her rights while the fake attorney was being handcuffed. Judge Westbrook was banging her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. But the biggest shock was still coming. "Detective Santos," I continued, "did your investigation reveal who else might be involved in this operation?" "Yes, we discovered that the defendant was working with a network of accomplices, including several individuals who posed as legitimate real estate attorneys, surveyors, and even judges in some cases." Judges. The operation was sophisticated enough to include temporary restraining orders and court orders that appeared legitimate, but were actually created by accomplices with access to official court documents. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Detective, are you saying that other people in other jurisdictions might have lost their property through fake court proceedings?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. This wasn't just fraud, it was organized crime operating at a multi-state level." Judge Westbrook called for a recess while additional law enforcement officers entered the courtroom. When we reconvened an hour later, Catherine Brennan was in handcuffs, facing federal charges for real estate fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. "Mr. Chen," Judge Westbrook said, "I'm dismissing all claims against your property with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering the immediate removal of all fraudulent listings and awarding you attorney's fees and damages in the amount of $150,000. But the real victory came 3 months later. The FBI's investigation into Catherine Brennan's operation led to the recovery of over $18 million in fraudulently acquired property and the return of homes to elderly victims who had thought they'd lost everything. As for Catherine Brennan, she was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The fake Robert Hayes turned out to be her brother, who received 10 years for his role in the conspiracy. Today, I still live on my 47-acre ranch, and the lake is more beautiful than ever. The Lakewood Estates HOA was dissolved and replaced with a legitimate management company. The original easement agreement remains in place, but now it's actually followed. And Karen Mitchell's old house, I bought it at auction for $200,000 below market value. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd spent months trying to steal my property, and I ended up owning hers. The lesson here is simple. If someone tries to steal your home, don't back down. Fight back with everything you've got. Because sometimes the person you're fighting isn't just a difficult neighbor, they're a career criminal who's done this before and will do it again. If you're facing a property dispute or think someone might be trying to defraud you, document everything, hire a good attorney, and never give up. Your home is worth fighting for. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth come out in court.